Good evening, and thank you for coming to the celebration of my father's last novel, Nostalgia. Before we get started, Judy Walcott, my father's partner of how many years?
35.
35 years. The 35 best years of his life.
End of mine.
Is going to read a land acknowledgement, and then we'll start.
And I think, Safathia, did this begin, this land acknowledgement, during your... I think so, because I think we came to City Hall. Peter and I both came to City Hall to hear it. And it's very meaningful to me to be reading it, because some of you know, most of you probably know, that Peter lived in Old Town, Maine, and wrote Glooskap's Children, and then he also lived out west with the Navajos. So it's very fitting that we should be reading this now. The city of Gloucester is located on the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Pawtucket people and their neighbors in Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pennacook, and Wampanoag tribes. The original Algonquian name for this land is Agawam, potentially meaning fish-curing place. We recognize and honor the native and indigenous peoples who have lived in this territory for more than 10,000 years, are here now, and will be here for generations to come. We acknowledge our responsibility to include Native people and perspectives across our efforts to share Gloucester's history, including the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. During Gloucester's 400th plus anniversary, and looking towards the future, we seek to expand the visibility of and celebrate the histories, cultures, and stories of the Native and indigenous peoples of this place.
Thank you, Judy. My name's Henry Farini. I am one of the founding directors of the Gloucester Writers Center. And on behalf of that organization, I want to welcome everyone here to celebrate the launch of Peter Anastas' book, Nostalgia. I want to thank Judy and Ben for pulling this event together, and for all our readers who will bring Peter's work to life. The mission of the Gloucester Writers Center is to honor and celebrate Cape Ann's rich literary history and to empower individuals to engage in writing and the telling of stories in the spirit of civic engagement. You know, when I think of civic engagement, I think there's only one dude who was the poster boy for civic engagement, and that was Peter Nicholas Anastas Jr. Yeah. Peter was lucky enough to grow up in a place where he met Jonathan Bayliss, Vincent Farini, Joe Garland, and Charles Olson. All these writers were mentors and later became friends, and all were focused on engaging this city. Peter was in the right place at the right time, and Gloucester is so much richer for his work. In the early 2000s, Peter joined a handful of artisan writers to create the Charles Olson Society. Later years, with help from Annie Thomas, Andre Spears, and myself, the organization morphed into what is now the Gloucester Writers Center. Peter was one of our founding board members and fondly coined the phrase, "The Gloucester Writers Center is a working writers' center in a working town." Today, we're happy to still be working as we celebrate Peter's launch. Thank you for coming out. And now, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here on this night to celebrate nostalgia. I just do want to say that Nostalgia is very profoundly a novel about Gloucester, about this place. And Judy reminded me of the story that Dad used to tell, which is that it was the early 1970s before Charles Olson's death, and my dad was kind of at sea as a writer, as we often are. Any of you who write know. And Olson gave him an assignment and said, your assignment is to write the secret history of Gloucester. And as much as Olson knew about Gloucester, the place and its history, the maritime, the life of the fishing industry, the documents of its founding. He didn't know Gloucester as a native did, and he knew that that's something that my father did know. And so I think most of what my father did as a writer followed from that assignment, to write about Gloucester in a way that only a native could. And I think this novel really is the culmination of all that. And I'm really happy you're here to read some pieces of it. We have copies for sale in back. $2 from every copy you buy tonight will go to the Gloucester Writers Center. You'll be supporting the bookstore of Gloucester. We're so happy that you're here as our partners. We have Dogtown Books also partnered with us on bringing out the second edition of A Walker in the City. My dad's newspaper columns. Those copies of that book are also for sale. So this is it's a real group effort, and we have so many wonderful partners in doing this. So our readers tonight, we have Lucas Miller from Salem, Massachusetts, Chief of Police, who I met in New York City in writer's circles because he used to go to book parties and write for Slate magazine. And when I was reading this first chapter, I just heard it in Luke's voice. Not to pigeonhole you, as I said.
All right.
But Luke is going to read. Joy Buell, my father's great friend, visual artist and arts educator, is also going to read. Bing McGilvery, my father's great friend from the bowels of the Cape Ann Museum, when they were working as archivists together. Bing, as you know, is an artist and a general kind of man about town. Paul Coltrera, who ran the Gloucester Food Co-op for years, where I was often dragged as a child, who went away to California and came back. I guess Peter convinced you to come back. And he's at Cafe Sicilia every afternoon at 2:30 for office hours. That's right. And then of course Safathia, who was my father's favorite mayor and one of his favorite people. And we're so honored that you're here reading a chapter about a character who's very much like yourself. So there are books for sale, and after the reading's going to be short, despite the fact that I'm droning on. I'm a professor now, and so when you get used to being a professor, you're just like, you open your mouth and it just starts, and it just goes.
That's a politician.
But it's going to be a brief reading, short excerpts from the chapters, and then there's going to be a reception downstairs with Prosecco, some great stuff from Cafe Sicilia, so please stick around for that. And we want to just help celebrate you, celebrate my dad, and celebrate this book. So with no further ado, here's the first reader.
Hello. It just gets better from here. Standing in semi-darkness across the street from Pike's funeral home, Rob St. John felt a dull, metallic jab in his left side. A man's voice demanded his wallet. It was an unsteady voice, local in accent, not youthful. He'd been robbed once before, near Eastern Station in London. The assault equally abrupt. Though shaken, he'd been unharmed, teaching him that it was best to submit. It was his first night back home. He'd just withdrawn $500 from the ATM machine on Rogers Street, overlooking the waterfront. It was a mild May evening, fragrant with lilac blossoms. He'd hoped to prolong it by taking a stroll along Middle Street, which he remembered as having once been lined with ancient oaks. His assailant must have been waiting under the remnants of those trees in the darkened parking lot next to Trinity Congregational Church. "It's in my back pocket," he answered, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Take it out," the man said more forcefully. He extracted his wallet and handed it over. From long experience, he had learned not to engage a hostile presence or make eye contact. He continued to stare at the undertaker's house, where both his parents' funerals had been held, until he was certain that his attacker had fled. He thought he heard footsteps, but the man appeared not to have run, merely to have melted back into the darkness. After what he hoped would be a safe interval, Rob made his way slowly to the more lighted section of the street, past the synagogue and the library. When he reached the corner, he turned right towards the police station. He reported the robbery to a young officer at the night desk. "Some junkie," the cop said, taking his name and address. "Were you carrying any credit cards?" "I left them home." He'd toss them away anyway. They're looking for cash to score. "Is it that bad?" "We get a couple of drug-related assaults a week," he said. "It fluctuates." "And the addicts?" "Mostly the OD," he said wearily. "Skag is skag. In the end, they're all looking for oblivion." He glanced down at his call list. "If we hear anything, we'll buzz you. Don't get your hopes up." But the chief was on the phone the next morning. "Hey, Robbie, we got your wallet down here. The cash is gone, but everything else you listed seems intact, right down to the international driver's license." When St. John appeared at the police station again, he was waved straight into the chief's office. Billy Johnson stood up, bright-faced. The two men shook hands warmly. "You don't look a day over 65. I see you haven't lost your sense of humor. Remember that time we all got smashed in the boys' room?" Rob chuckled at the distant image of 4 seniors in jackets and ties, slumped against the wash basins, chugging from pints of Southern Comfort, while an underclassman stood lookout. "And the floormaster took pity on us because he knew once the principal found out, we'd all get expelled," he reminisced. "Sayonara college." Ah, those years of benign neglect. I envy you here at the center of things. And you haven't seen anything? I heard you were in Bosnia. That's all over now, Billy. I noticed you're at the house. I was sorry to hear about your mother. I can still taste her blueberry muffins. The tenants left. My sister wanted to put the property on the market, but I talked her into letting me stay there until I got settled. You might stay settled, the chief said. This place can still do that to you. Don't let the junkies scare you off.
This is chapter 5. Heading into the Y to sign up for a membership, Rob was stopped by a young man with a closely shaved beard. "You're Tony's friend," he said, thrusting his hand forward for a vigorous shake. "I'm James. How would you like to speak to my current events class at the high school?" Rob chuckled. "I should have remembered that everything happens on the street in Gloucester. I'm still catching my breath. These kids are great. You could catch it with them." He lowered his head apologetically. "Nothing like blindsiding someone you don't even know. Hey, a friend of Tony's. He told me you'd probably be up for it. I'll be glad to come to your class. How soon?" "How about tomorrow?" Rob took out his iPhone. "It's not as if my dance card is full. Tony said you're working on a book. Maybe you could talk about that." "It's a little premature to talk about the book. What topic are you focusing on now? Maybe we can start with that." "We're doing the Balkans after the breakup of communism." "Well, I might have something useful to say about that. The kids will flip out knowing you've been there." The discussion had gone well, better than he had expected. The students were smart and attentive. They asked relevant questions, and they appeared to have gone beyond the simplifications of their study guides. Many seemed fascinated by the post-communist world, and not merely because Eastern Europe and the Balkans had Americanized so rapidly. He expected the kids might want to know about tastes in music and dress. Was hardcore punk rock making a comeback in Belgrade, too? But they were more interested to learn why organized crime, for example, had become so prevalent, and not just in Russia, as everyone knew. How come the Albanians are so heavily into the drug trade? One boy in sloppy jeans and a torn T-shirt had asked. Is the geography a factor? As they talked back and forth, Rob noticed a girl who sat silently near the back of the room. She wore a frayed denim miniskirt over pearl gray leggings, pink flip-flops on her feet. Her complexion was glowing, her dark blonde hair in a ponytail. There was something familiar about her. The openness of her face, her large blue eyes, the set of her chin, as if he'd known her from somewhere, a street in Prague. Faces glimpsed once often return to you as if from a dream. But his question was answered after class when the girl lingered on the fringe of his parting conversation with James. Do you know Julie? James turned from Rob to the silent, glowing girl. You should know me, she spoke brightly. I'm your cousin, Sharon's granddaughter. That makes us cousins too. Sharon died last year, Julie explained as she walked with him toward the main entrance in the school, the curious eyes of students following them. Cancer. Nobody wrote me. I had to hear about it on a Facebook post. You know, Sharon and I were very close growing up. My grandmother often spoke of you, Julie said, pausing in the lobby. She was proud of your accomplishments. How's your mother? Up and down, Julie said, mostly down these days, but let's not go there. I remember Sharon was an amazing teacher. She taught 5th grade right up to the end. Julie left him to rush off to another class, but she turned around before she vanished with a smile he recognized. Wait till Ma hears you're back.
This is chapter 11, perhaps appropriately. Sitting at a small round table in the big front window of Cafe Sicilia, I got it wrong. Rob sipped his ristretto as he looked across at the 19th century red brick buildings. They'd been restored since the last visit home, and his work was tasteful. What had changed were the tenants. The main street, he remembered, sawdust scattered across the floor at the National Butcher's, the smell of freshly ground coffee from Kennedy's Butter and Eggs, the law offices, insurance agencies, and apartments on the floor above them. This main street had now been transformed into a row of boutiques and art galleries topped by expensive-looking condominiums. The Italian bakery, diagonally across the street from the cafe, was now a gourmet grocery. As he tried to picture the West End he'd known from childhood, wondering what had happened to Mice Pastry Shop or Pascucci's shoe repair, a familiar figure came into view. He was slender and of medium height, lightly bearded and with a black beret on his head. He was carrying 2 cameras, one around his neck on a strap, the other in his hand, neither one digital. Sensing that he was being observed, he stopped to stare at Rob through the black circular lenses of his sunglasses. Then he knocked on the window. "You're back!" It had to be, his old high school classmate, Sully Cameron. Rob waved him in, and the 2 men embraced. Cameron had about him the unmistakable smell of darkroom chemicals. "Sit, have some coffee." Cameron signaled the counterman. Soon a steaming cappuccino had been placed in front of him. "They know what you like. I come to this place all the time. I keep this place going." "What about the newcomers?" "They get their lattes at upscale cafe down the street. The clientele here consists of natives like me and what's left of the fishermen. I see there are still some boats in the harbor. Fewer by the day. Do you have time for a tour?" Sully had learned photography in Vietnam. After his discharge with a Purple Heart, he'd gotten a job at the Gloucester Times. His pictures were so arresting that the paper began winning prizes. But some readers had noticed a somber quality to many of them, as if each image contained a subtext about the hidden life of the city, slowly revealing its secrets. The Chamber of Commerce complained that Sully's front-page photographs made Gloucester look like a pinched, desolate Texas town, like in the last picture show. Portraits of fishermen and athletic stars seemed to reveal despair in their creased faces and vacant eyes, rather than hope and bravery. But Sully went on his way, bearded and with that black beret on his head, given to him by one of the Viet Minh he'd befriended in the country, who'd gotten it off the corpse of a French colonial. He showed up at fires depicting gas explosion that had turned into a raging inferno, the grief of evicted tenants, their belongings scattered along the sidewalk. Jimmy Cook, the editor who hired him, loved his work, and the reporters couldn't wait to see what Sully came in with next. But the publisher felt that Sully's stark images were bringing the paper down, and the city along with it. It was only when the startling sequence of grainy black and white prints Sully had snapped one night at a drug house on Portuguese Hill had been discovered hanging in the dry in the dark room, ready for the next day's edition, that Sully was finally called on the carpet and let go. After they fired him, the paper got stodgier. Even the reporters seemed to lose their edge without his pictures, while Sully himself went underground. As the two men made their way across Main Street, heading down to Rogers toward the town landing, Rob asked, "Are you still in the old house?" "Lost it. I couldn't work. Then my health gave out." "Where are you living now?" "I'm still in the East End. I got a couple of rooms above the Brazilian grocery. Cold water, no heat." "Jesus, at your age?" "It's either that or elderly housing and no darkroom." "Aren't you collecting Social Security?" "That and disability, but the new money in town has driven all the rents up." Sully shook his head in disgust. "The whole city's ghettoized now. The affluent have taken over the traditional neighborhoods. Those who once rented are in public housing or living like me at the sufferance of slumlords." "Did any of this occur to the city councilors when they were handing out development permits?" "They couldn't give the city away fast enough." "No one on the city council objected?" Sully raised his eyebrows. "Anyone who demonstrated a smidgen of insight didn't last." They stood at the old town landing at St. Peter's parking lot. In front lay the inner harbor with the view over toward the mansions of Rocky Neck, built in the 19th century by ship's captains and members of the codfish aristocracy. Families who owned the vessels and the companies to process the fish they brought in from the Grand Banks. Millions of pounds of cod and haddock. To their left, along Rogers Street, were restaurants, one after the other, flanked by tour buses that had begun to disgorge passengers, lining up like school children waiting for lunch. "They call this street Restaurant Row now," Sully said. "Just imagine, when we were kids, there were ship chandlers and machine shops here. You could peek in and see guys soldering sheet metal and repairing radar systems." "All that's gone. Now it's just places for tourists to chow down on lobster rolls and drink microbrews. At night, the Amex black cards come out. The view of the harbor is what brings them, I guess. There's little to see but their own yachts." "But the Bird's Eye Tower?" Rob asked as they crossed the parking lot to enter Commercial Street. "That came down when they built the hotel." "Don't tell me there's a hotel where we brought our dates for Fiesta." "That's not the half of it." Sully gestured to the rest of the street, once crowded with fish processing plants. "What happened to the Frontera brothers?" "Bought and leveled. Pretty soon they'll be condos." "I thought there were port area restrictions." "They shot those regs down as soon as they could. You can build practically anything you want in the water now." "My God, Sully, the waterfront was the last stand for the fishing industry." "The boats are all confined to the state pier. What few remain."
You need to have a direction sign about how to get up there. It's very interesting closet back there. Chapter 22. The office of the Gloucester Fishermen's Partnership was located in the Blackburn Industrial Park, set on top of a portion of the city's watershed that abutted Dogtown Common. From when he was in college, Rob remembered that there had been a fierce battle to prevent the access roads from crossing the watershed. One of the leaders in that struggle was none other than Anna Shalufo, a young fisherman's wife, newly arrived from Sicily but sophisticated beyond her years in the politics of survival. Grasping the importance of clean water to the fishing industry for making ice to keep the catches fresh and for the eventual processing of millions of pounds of fish that had once been unloaded on the Gloucester waterfront, Anna had jumped into the campaign to preserve the watershed. She was joined by Lena Novello, president of the newly formed Fishermen's Wives Association. Old school fishermen were aghast at the sight of women demonstrating at the industrial park or packing the city council meetings at City Hall to protest the road proposal. But Lena, Anna, and dozens of other women, young and old, refused to be silenced in public or at home by husbands and fathers who had never conceived of women doing anything but cooking and rearing children. Of course, they were allowed to work cutting and packing fish because their jobs brought money to the family. Anna welcomed him into her office, hung with Sully's photographs of St. Peter's siesta and the annual late June celebration of the patron saint of fishermen. Rob remembered from his childhood as the year's most exciting event of the historic fishing community they'd all grown up in. Sully's the best, Anna said, in her slightly accented English. We went to school together. Un ragazzo molto bravo, she nodded, her dark eyes shining. She was a small woman, ageless, and fashionably dressed in black silk slacks and a pretty blouse that had to have come from Italy. Stylish heels, naturally. Tony tells me you're interested in how we've come to where we are. Not to pry too much, Rob said. I've been away for a long time, and I'm shocked at what I'm discovering. Not only by what I see, the changes themselves, but by what I'm hearing from people. You mean about how these changes came about? Exactly. I'm going to tell you everything I know about it, Anna said, getting up from her desk. But first, let's go into the kitchen so I can fix us a nice espresso. Anna led Rob to a table set with a plate of fresh Sicilian pastries, as she deftly poured them tiny cups of steaming coffee from a big, shiny DeLonghi machine on an adjacent counter. Sit, please. I feel like I'm home again, Rob said. You mean your real home? I lived in Italy for so many years I felt I had no other home. Italians can make you feel that way, Anna said. I left Palermo when I was just out of school, but we try to go back at least once a year, Giovanni and me, and we travel, Roma, Firenze, even Trieste, but the best is to visit the family in Cetacini. It's a lovely town. It reminds me of Gloucester. The same thing that happened here is happening there, she lamented. Tourists, summer homes for rich Romans, no more little shops, and the kids all leaving for the big cities. I went to Liceo and Palermo, so I can't talk, she left. What brought you to Gloucester? It's a typical story, Anna said. My husband came to meet his relatives. His family brought him to America when he was a little boy, and he'd never been back to the old country. One day, his family comes home, so Giovanni and his sister Nuncia come see where they were born. Pretty soon, my mother hears about the visit. There are no secrets in Terracini. And she goes over to welcome everyone. Next thing, she comes back excited. There's a very handsome young man next door. Anna smiled broadly. As usual, my mother was right. Giovanni was handsome. We turned out to be the same age. He's done with school. Already he's fishing with his father. He tells me all about Gloucester, how he loves the city, and how he's working hard to buy his own fishing boat. Anna was laughing. You have to hand it to these immigrants, she said. They work hard and they don't abandon their culture. Rob found himself smiling across the table at Anna. Ma subito, she said. He goes back and we write letters. The next thing you know, my family sends me on a visit. I fall in love with Gloucester, with Giovanni too. Pretty soon we get married, then my mother and father decide to come over. So the whole family's here, and that's how everything started. How'd you get involved with the Fishermen's Wives? We didn't have too long before the trouble started, Anna said. At the beginning, it was the Russian factory ships looting the waters, so we fought for a 200-mile limit to protect our industry. And then we're opposing the big energy companies who want to drill for oil and gas in the richest spawning areas. We win that one. Before we can sit down and prepare for what comes next, the government's on our backs with new regulations. First, it was the net size limit, and then came the catch limits. Anna sipped her espresso, moving the plate of exquisite honest cookies toward Rob. There's no question that the stocks had collapsed, she said, but the conservation measures were extreme. They put half the fleet out of business. Worse was the lobbying of the environmental foundations. They used to be our friends when we all fought big energy together. Now they say they want to save the ocean for future generations. Well, that's well and good, but when you put whole communities out of business, you don't save anyone. You only cause greater misery. Rob watched Anna's eyes well with tears. It makes me so angry to see with the power of government and these foundations who should understand our marine economy due to a simple fishing family that just wants to make a living. Rob set his cup down on the Formica top table. The room was quiet except for his own breathing and the click of Anna's shoes on the tile floor as she took his cup and refilled it. This is the best espresso I've had since Rome. Where would we be without coffee? The brightness was restored to Anna's face. Let me try to explain to you what happened with the hotel, Anna said, resuming her seat across from Rob. It was like nothing we'd experienced before. She paused to take a deep breath.
So if I sway back and forth, it's because I just had my hip operated on. I had a hip replacement, and I should be home resting, but I loved Peter. Chapter 40. When Rob was shown into the mayor's high-ceilinged office at City Hall, he found her at lunch, flashing him a smile, and she stretched out a hand. The new mayor was an ample woman, such as you might see shopping in the markets of Terracini. She had lustrous black hair, a flowing dress of dark reds and golds. Her only makeup was her lipstick. The nails of shapely hands were painted dark red. Go, take it, she handed him a large wheat cracker and a slice of paper-thin salmon on it. It's fresh from Alaska. I made the sauce myself. The fish was delicious and the sauce richly eloquent. Have some more, she stretched out her hand again. We're working on value-added products. We've already developed smoked clams and fish. Next, going on to Saipo fillets. She grinned, showing her bright white teeth. Tony said you want to speak with me? How can I help you? I've come home for a while, Rob said, and I'm trying to adjust to the changes. Well, tell me about it, she gave her a hearty laugh. What interests me the most was the hotel, Tony said. You might be able to offer some insights of how it all came about? Don't tell me we're going there again. She threw up her arms. The whole business was a pastiaccio. The walls of the mayor's office were hung with paintings, oils, and watercolors of the schooners under the full-sail, rich fishing vessel tied up. At the sea, beaches, scenes, landscapes, together they formed a visual of history of the city. Fishing in the arts, she gestured toward the vibrant artworks. This is the real Gloucester. Tourism just an icing on the cake. We've always tolerated, but I don't believe we need to allow it to dominate it. Doesn't that put you in the opposition to those who want to replace the marine industry with hospitality? She cocked her head. If you want to know the truth, I don't give a shit what they think. They both laughed. Look, what can I tell you that they've done already? Raising a pair of black-rimmed glasses from her eyes, and she said, Tony, let me tell you. You've been interviewing, you're interviewing? He says, we talked to most of the right people, and some of the wrong. She flashed. Do I get it now or not? I see I could have saved myself some trouble by coming to you first, Rob said. You may know what I did at this point, the mayor said, except I could tell you what it felt like to be on the inside from the point of the view of the city council. Anna told me they had put pressure on you because of you're a member of the Fishermen's Wives. I'm vice president. She jabbed her finger in her breast. 2 of the councilors filed a complaint to the State Ethics Commission. They claim that since I'm an officer of that group that complained about and opposed of the hotel, I shouldn't be allowed to vote. You were forced to recuse yourself. It's not that simple, she said. The ethics ruled that I could vote because as a council I represented the community at large. But in order to avoid any hint of conclusion, I merely voted present, though I would have preferred to vote no. Do you know that because we were thinking of running for mayor, I did because I can only run and I wanted to take the issue off the table. But they still came after me, claiming that by voting present was ambitious where I stood. It sounds to me that they have considered you more dangerous as mayor. They already did. They voted and they locked it up, the mayor said. First with the rezoning, then for the hotel. They didn't need my vote, although the developers would have liked to be unanimous votes with the permit contested, but you didn't want to make it so. I was looking ahead, she said. With the previous mayor, they could have anything they wanted. She was ready to turn the entire waterfront over to them. With me, they knew they would have to fight for every effing inch of it. I don't think that's me. Even if the council was ready and on board, the sad thing is, you used to have the council who would vote responsibly and advocating for the good of the community. Now you've got one that's falling all over itself to give the city away. How do the voters feel about this? I won the mayor election 2-1 against the ex-mayor's hand-picked candidate. I guess it makes it clear what the minority stands. They always stood for preservation of the waterfront, she said, but we're up against a new kind of force. I heard they mounted a pretty sophisticated campaign that took even more seasoned politicians by surprise. They used the social media for the first time, local politics, setting up pro-hotel websites and blogs. They were all over Facebook. Anna probably told you how they reacted to phony grassroots groups with a name that fooled people into thinking that there was a community-minded organization when it was really a lobby for the hotel. This is not the Gloucester I grew up in. You haven't heard anything yet, said the mayor. Do you know that they brought skilled prosecutors, and she flipped over the top bottle. Justin, Rob, take some from my desk, take it all. They so-called consultants would approach members of the opposition. They asked for their credentials, their commitment to the city. They would accuse them for representing unpopular groups or drop hints that they were paid off, or even worse. They threatened legal action against them for undermining the development right to the contract of lawful business. They threatened to take away their homes or make them lose their jobs. But the opposition is protected by the law. A lot of people they threatened weren't aware of the slap suits or other kind of legal protection for citizens exercising their right to protest when they felt unfair and undevelopment. Many of them had no political experience. They were just trying to save the neighborhood they lived in for generations. Even so, I heard there was massive opposition to the hotel, Rob said. Yeah, that's true, the mayor said, but by the time it came to the final public hearing, the proponents had managed to compromise a significant number of opposition members, and that before tried to frighten them off by having a law enforcement presence and hearing room complete with police dogs. The implication being that violence was expected. Can you believe that? Violence in City Hall? Only when my father took me to the wrestling matches I saw that. That was tamed compared to other shenanigans that they have done. I don't know who the mayor was with the red nails and the red lipstick or whatever, but I wanted to say one thing. Even if I had to come in a wheelchair tonight, I would come. Peter Anastas was my all-favorite person when I was younger. He would come to my mother's house, and they would talk to my father, who was the biggest Democrat advocate. If me being independent, he's probably turning over his grave. We grew up with Peter Anastas. We grew up with Bill Rochford, Tim Riley, the first co-op at Cafe Chichilla. It was the first one. They first tried to start it. Peter loved and helped educate my father, who finished school, college, become a social worker. He was first on the board of Action, started the first Fisherman's Wives, started the first Fisherman. He was the biggest advocate you can think of. If he'd see Gloucester today, him and Peter right now are walking in heaven and walking around and going like, we have to wake them up. They've been sleeping too long. We need to educate them. It's their city. It's their life. We need to change things. We need to actually, they're probably saying, I'm not worried of the people building things because it's going to sink if we don't do something first about our coastal. All here in Rocky Neck is going to be underwater. What are we going to save? And we saw what happened in Hawaii. Real estate people still, they're trying to find a loved one, and they're asking if they can buy their land. We're not allowed to do that here. We're not going to let them do that. I don't care if I'm mayor, I don't care for anything else, but I was born and raised here, and Peter was a great mentor to my father, to myself, to my sisters, to my brother. He loved my father's poems. Do you know he's the only one who read mine and told me I should print them and wanted to help me print them? Yes, I have culture too. And the fact is that he taught us so much. My father, like a place like this, is where we used to go on Elm Street in action, and all the advocacies and for housing. Can you believe it? From 1970 now, we are still fighting for affordable housing. We're still fighting for people's rights. We're still fighting. We shouldn't be doing that. We should have it all. This was our city. Let's take it back. Thank you. And no, I'm not running for any office. Not running for office. Or stick around service. He was the other one who was the other Tony.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you to all of our readers. Luke, you could do audiobooks, voiceover.
They make fun of me on the police radio.
He has the voice like the Dark Shadows on Hollywood Square. I wanted him to read for me.
So please stay. There are books for sale, as we said. Downstairs, there's lots of Prosecco, mineral water. We have nice, really delicious things to eat from Cafe Sicilia. So stick around. And thanks again so much for coming. And thanks to our readers for making time for this. Lots of love.